She moved into a treehouse while the whole town watched and whispered, calling her crazy, calling her broken, saying she'd lost her mind along with everything else. But when she found what was hidden behind those wooden walls, when she discovered the secret room that had been sealed for over 40 years, their laughter died in their throats, and the black woman they mocked became the one who would change everything. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The morning sun filtered through the oak leaves like liquid gold. But Aisha Thompson barely noticed. She stood at the base of an enormous elm tree on the eastern edge of Riverside Bend, Oregon, staring up at what the locals had been calling the crazy treehouse for the better part of 3 decades. Her daughter, Lila, stood beside her, small hand clutched tight in Aisha's calloused palm. The girl was 7 years old, with wild kinky coils and eyes that had seen too much sadness for someone so young. Aisha was 34, though she felt ancient. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore jeans with paint stains that wouldn't wash out and a flannel shirt 2 sizes too big. It had been her father's before he passed. Her rich brown skin bore the faint lines of exhaustion, a testament to the battle she'd fought. She'd lost weight over the past 18 months, the kind of weight that comes from stress, eating through bone and muscle until all that's left is survival. Once upon a time, she'd been Aisha Thompson Jenkins, rising star architect at one of Portland's most prestigious firms. She designed luxury condos with floor-to-ceiling windows, modern mansions with infinity pools, commercial buildings that won awards and were featured in glossy magazines. She'd had it all. A husband, Marcus, who worked in finance. A sprawling home in the West Hills with heated floors and a wine cellar. A walk-in closet bigger than most people's bedrooms. Designer clothes, yearly trips to Europe, a nanny for Lila, and a housekeeper who came 3 times a week. She'd thought she was living the dream. Turns out dreams can rot from the inside while you're too busy to notice. The divorce had been brutal. Marcus had been having an affair with his assistant for 2 years. 2 years of lies served with a smile over breakfast. 2 years of late nights he blamed on work. While he was actually in hotel rooms, Aisha's paychecks helped afford. When she finally discovered the truth, he didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just hired the most ruthless lawyer in the state and went for her throat. Aisha had been naive. She'd thought fairness mattered, that courts protected mothers and children. But Marcus's family had money, old money, the kind that bought favors and bent rules. By the time the dust settled, she'd lost almost everything. The house went to Marcus. The savings split, but somehow she ended up with crumbs. He kept the cars, the furniture, the life they'd built. She got weekends with Lila and a tight apartment in a part of Portland where gunshots punctuated the night like a metronome, keeping time with her racing heart. But the worst part, the part that still made her throat close up when she thought about it, was losing her job. Marcus's family had connections everywhere, including the firm where she worked. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, they let her go. Budget cuts, they said. Restructuring. She knew better. She'd seen the way her boss avoided eye contact, the way HR rushed through the exit interview. She'd been erased. For 6 months, she sent out resumes. Nothing, not even interviews. Marcus's reach was longer than she'd imagined. Or maybe the architecture world was smaller. Either way, the money ran out fast. The tiny apartment became unaffordable. Her car got repossessed. She started taking whatever work she could find. Waitressing, cleaning houses, anything that paid cash and didn't ask questions. That's when she saw the listing. Property for sale. Riverside Bend. Unique structure. Needs vision. $15,000 or best offer. Riverside Bend was a town of about 4,000 people nestled in the Cascade foothills, 2 hours from Portland. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where secrets lasted about 5 minutes, and where newcomers were examined like specimens under a microscope. The property listing had been up for 8 months with no takers. Aisha drove out on a gray Tuesday morning with Lila asleep in the passenger seat of a borrowed Honda. When she first saw it, she understood why no one wanted it. The treehouse sat 30 feet up in a cluster of ancient trees, elm and oak and Douglas fir, their trunks thick as cars, their branches intertwined like clasped fingers. The structure itself was weathered wood, silvered by time and rain, with a steep roof and narrow windows that looked like suspicious eyes. A suspension bridge connected it to the ground, swaying gently in the wind, its wooden planks, worn, but intact. It looked like something from a fairy tale, the kind where children get eaten. But Aisha didn't see danger. She saw bones, structure, engineering. Her architect's eye traced the lines of the building, noted the careful joinery, the way the weight was distributed across multiple trees, the reinforced platform that had clearly been designed by someone who understood load-bearing and wind resistance. This wasn't some hobbyist's weekend project. This was real architecture, hidden in the trees like a secret. The real estate agent, a nervous black woman named Kendra with frosted tips and a Bluetooth earpiece, had been apologetic. "I know it's unusual," she'd said. "The previous owner died about 10 years ago, and the property's been in probate hell ever since. No family could be located. Finally, the county took possession and just wants it gone. Honestly, between you and me, most folks think it's cursed." "Cursed?" Aisha had repeated flatly. Kendra had shrugged. "You know how small towns are. The guy who built it was supposedly some eccentric recluse kept to himself, didn't talk to nobody. One day he just disappeared. Some say he fell off the bridge and the lake took him. Others say he ran off or died up there and animals scattered the bones. Either way, place has been empty since around 2000. Kids used to dare each other to spend the night up there, but the county put up no trespassing signs about 5 years back." Aisha had walked the property line, examining the foundation posts, the cable system that supported the bridge, the way the trees had grown around the structure without crushing it. Whoever built this knew what they were doing. More than that, they'd loved it. She could see it in the details, the carved railings, the way the windows were positioned to catch both sunrise and sunset, the small covered porch that wrapped around two sides. "I'll take it," she'd said. 12,000 cash. That's all I have." Kendra had blinked. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. The sale closed in 3 weeks. Aisha used every penny she had left, every dollar scraped from odd jobs and her dwindling savings account. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing. Not her mother, who lived in Arizona and called once a month with criticism disguised as concern. Not her few remaining friends who'd slowly ghosted her after the divorce. She just signed the papers, took the keys, and made plans to move. Riverside Bend found out fast. Small towns had radar for new blood, especially blood that looked like trouble. By the time Aisha drove through Main Street with a rented U-Haul truck full of her meager possessions, half the town already knew. The black woman who bought the treehouse, the one from Portland, heard she lost everything in a divorce. Heard she's got a kid. What kind of mother moves a child into a treehouse? Must be desperate. Must be crazy. Must be both. Aisha felt the stares like pin pricks. She stopped at the general store for supplies and conversation died the moment she walked through the door. Black women with shopping baskets looked her up and down, their expressions ranging from pity to contempt. The cashier, a teenage boy with bad skin, rang up her items in silence, but she heard the whispers start the moment she left. She drove to the property just after noon. The U-Haul barely fit down the narrow dirt road that led to the treehouse. When she finally parked and climbed out, she saw them. Neighbors, spectators, people had come to watch. They stood at the edge of the property line, maybe a dozen of them, some with arms crossed, others openly pointing. A man in his 50s with a thick beard and a hunting vest called out, "You really moving up there with a kid?" Aisha squared her shoulders. "That's right." A black woman with gray hair and a pinched face shook her head. "That's child endangerment. Someone should call services. The structure is sound," Aisha said, keeping her voice level even though her hands were shaking. "I had it inspected." "Inspected by who?" the bearded man asked. "No one's been up there in over a decade." Whole thing could collapse. It won't, Aisha said. She didn't mention that she'd inspected it herself, that she'd spent 3 days climbing every inch of the structure, testing joints, checking for rot, examining the cable systems. She didn't mention her architecture degree or her years of experience because these people didn't care about credentials. They cared about gossip, about feeling superior, about having someone to look down on. Lila climbed out of the car. Her small backpack clutched to her chest. She looked at the crowd, then up at her mother with wide, frightened eyes. Aisha felt something crack inside her chest. This was supposed to be a fresh start. This was supposed to be better. Come on, sweetie, she said softly, taking Lila's hand. Let's go see our new home. They walked to the suspension bridge together. The crowd's whispers followed them like gnats. Aisha tested the first plank with her weight, then the second. The bridge swayed, but held firm. She picked Lila up and carried her across. The girl's arms wrapped tight around her neck. The ascent took 5 minutes. When they reached the platform, and Aisha unlocked the door. She half expected disaster. But the interior took her breath away. Sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating a single large room with vaulted ceilings and exposed beams. The floor was wide plank pine worn smooth by time. There was a small kitchen area with a vintage stove, a wood-burning fireplace with a stone hearth, built-in bookshelves along one wall, and a sleeping loft accessible by a wooden ladder. Everything was dusty, covered in cobwebs and mouse droppings, but beneath the grime she could see craftsmanship, real artistry. The joinery was impeccable, each beam fitted perfectly, each joint reinforced. The windows were double-paned, probably added later to improve insulation. There was even plumbing, a small bathroom tucked into a corner with a composting toilet and a shower. "Mama," Lila whispered. "It's like a castle." Aisha felt tears sting her eyes. "Yeah, baby. It is." They spent the afternoon carrying boxes up the swaying bridge. Aisha's arms ached. Her back screamed, but she didn't stop. Every trip across, she could feel eyes watching from below. The crowd had thinned, but not disappeared. She ignored them. Let them watch. Let them judge. She'd survived worse than small-town cruelty. By sunset, most of their belongings were inside. It wasn't much. Clothes, books, Lila's toys, a few kitchen supplies, 2 mattresses they'd carried up the bridge like awkward rafts. No furniture, no television, nothing valuable because there was nothing valuable left. Just the essentials of a life stripped down to its bones. Aisha made grilled cheese sandwiches on the old stove, which miraculously still worked, and they ate sitting on the floor as the sun sank behind the mountains. Through the western windows, the sky turned orange, then pink, then deep purple. The trees rustled in the evening breeze, and somewhere far below, the lake rushed over stones, its voice a constant whisper. "Are we going to be okay?" Lila asked quietly. Aisha looked at her daughter, at those eyes that trusted her despite everything and lied. "Yeah, sweetie. We're going to be just fine." After Lila fell asleep on her mattress in the loft, Aisha sat alone in the main room, wrapped in a blanket, watching the moon rise through the branches. The treehouse made sounds, creaks, and groans as the wood settled. Rustlings from the walls that might have been mice or squirrels. But there was something else, too. Something she couldn't quite place. She stood and walked the perimeter of the room slowly, running her hands along the walls. The construction was remarkable. The logs were hand-hewn, fitted together with precision that spoke of obsessive attention to detail. But there were oddities, too. Places where the interior wall didn't quite match the exterior dimensions. A section near the bookshelf where the wood sounded hollow when she knocked. A floorboard near the fireplace that sat slightly higher than the others. Her architect's brain catalogued these inconsistencies automatically. The room was smaller than it should be given the exterior footprint. Not by much, maybe 3 or 4 feet total, but enough to notice if you knew what to look for. And Aisha knew. She pulled out a small notebook and began sketching, measuring with her steps, noting angles and dimensions. The more she looked, the more convinced she became that there was space unaccounted for, hidden space. But why and where? A sound made her freeze. A soft thump from somewhere inside the walls, followed by what sounded almost like footsteps. She held her breath, listening, the wind maybe, or animals in the rafters. Old houses made noise. Old tree houses probably made even more. But Aisha had designed enough buildings to know the difference between settling and something else. This was something else. She climbed the ladder to check on Lila, who was sleeping peacefully, one arm wrapped around a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Aisha kissed her forehead gently, then returned downstairs. She added another log to the fireplace, watching the flames catch and spread. Tomorrow she'd start looking for work. Tomorrow she'd enroll Lila in the local school. Tomorrow she'd face the judgment and whispers and prove to this town that she wasn't broken, wasn't crazy, wasn't someone to be pitied. But tonight, in this strange, beautiful treehouse suspended between earth and sky, she allowed herself to simply breathe. She thought about Marcus in his big house with his new wife, probably eating dinner at the dining table Aisha had picked out, sitting on chairs she'd chosen. She thought about her old life, the one that looked perfect from the outside while rotting from within. She thought about how far she'd fallen and how much further she still had to fall. But then she looked around this single room, with its worn floors and hand-carved details, at the way moonlight painted silver squares on the pine boards, at the life she and Lila would build here from nothing. And she felt something unexpected. Hope. Small, fragile, terrifying, but hope nonetheless. The next morning arrived with birdsong and the smell of wood smoke. Aisha woke on her mattress near the fireplace, stiff and cold despite the blanket. She'd forgotten how chilly October mornings could be in the mountains. She restarted the fire, made instant coffee with water heated on the stove, and watched the sunrise paint the world gold through the eastern windows. Lila woke slowly, climbing down from the loft with sleepy eyes and tangled hair. They ate cereal without milk because the small refrigerator wasn't cold yet, and Aisha made a mental list of everything that needed to be done. Winterize the treehouse. Check the heating system. Seal any drafts. Stock firewood. Find work. Enroll Lila in school. Ignore the judgmental stares. Survive. Just survive. She walked Lila down the swaying bridge and to the road where the school bus would come. Other children were already gathering at various stops along the rural route. Aisha saw mothers in cars watching, whispering. She saw kids pointing at Lila, already marking her as different. You'll be okay, Aisha said, kneeling down to Lila's level. If anyone's mean, you tell the teacher. What if the teacher's mean, too? Lila asked quietly. Aisha's heart broke a little. Then you tell me, and I'll handle it. The bus arrived with a wheeze of brakes. Lila climbed on and Aisha watched through the windows as other children stared or looked away. The bus pulled away and Aisha was left standing alone on the dirt road, feeling the weight of every choice that had brought her here. She spent the morning cleaning the treehouse, sweeping out years of accumulated dust and debris, scrubbing the windows until light poured through unobstructed, washing the floors on her hands and knees. The physical work felt good, purposeful, and it gave her time to observe. The more she cleaned, the more she noticed. The bookshelf along the eastern wall was built into the structure itself, but it was deeper than it needed to be. The stone fireplace had an odd gap behind it, visible only if you got down on the floor and looked up into the chimney. And that floorboard near the hearth, the one that sat higher than the others. When she pressed on it, it gave slightly, like something beneath had compressed. Aisha pulled her notebook out again and added to her sketches. She measured the room's interior dimensions, then went outside and measured the exterior. The math didn't add up. There was approximately 4 feet of space on the eastern wall that existed outside, but not inside. 4 feet of nothing or 4 feet of something. She was about to investigate further when she heard voices below. Aisha walked to the railing and looked down to see 3 black women standing at the base of the tree. Looking up, they were probably in their 40s or 50s, dressed in fleece vests and jeans, hair pulled back in practical ponytails. "Hello," Aisha called down. We wanted to introduce ourselves. One of them called back. She had dark hair going grey and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm Jasmine. This is Simone and Tasha. We're from the Riverside Bend Women's Community Group. Aisha's stomach tightened. She recognized a delegation when she saw one. Nice to meet you. We wanted to welcome you to town, Jasmine continued. And just express some concerns about your living situation. Concerns, Aisha repeated. It's just that a treehouse isn't really appropriate for raising a child, Simone chimed in. She was shorter, rounder, with a pinched expression. We're worried about safety and frankly about your judgment. Aisha gripped the railing, forcing herself to stay calm. The structure is sound. I'm an architect. I know what I'm doing. We're an architect, Tasha corrected. She was tall and thin with sharp features and sharper eyes. We heard you lost your job and your marriage and custody of your daughter. The words hit like bullets. Aisha felt her face flush hot. I have joint custody, and my personal life is none of your business. It becomes our business when you endanger a child in our community, Jasmine said, her voice taking on a sanctimonious tone. We've already spoken to the school principal and to county services. Someone will be coming to do a home visit. A home visit, Aisha said numbly. It's for the best, Simone said. For the child's safety. They left without another word, disappearing back down the trail like they delivered a message from on high. Aisha stood frozen, hands shaking, rage and fear warring in her chest. They were going to try to take Lila. These self-righteous black women who didn't know her, who didn't know anything except gossip and judgment, were going to try to take the only good thing she had left. She went back inside and sat on the floor, head in her hands. For a long moment, she let herself feel the despair, the crushing weight of being alone and judged and hunted. Then she lifted her head and looked around the treehouse. She would fight. She'd lost everything else, but she wouldn't lose this. She wouldn't lose Lila. If they wanted to inspect her home, fine. She'd make it spotless. She'd prove the structure was safe. She'd show them that being poor and unconventional didn't make her a bad mother. Aisha stood and went back to work with renewed fury. She scrubbed every surface until it gleamed. She organized their belongings into neat piles. She tested the bridge supports, tightened loose boards, checked every nail and joint. By the time she had to walk back down to meet Lila's bus, the treehouse looked almost normal. Almost like a home. Lila came running when she saw Aisha. Her backpack bouncing. Mama, how was school? Aisha asked, kneeling to hug her. Lila's face fell. Some kids were mean. They said we live in a fort for homeless people. Aisha closed her eyes briefly, then forced a smile. Do you like living in our treehouse? I love it, Lila said. It's like we're birds. Then that's all that matters. Aisha said. What other people think doesn't change what we know is true. They walked back up the trail together. Lila chattering about her teacher, who seemed nice, and the library that had a whole shelf of chapter books she wanted to read. Aisha listened, holding her daughter's hand, and tried not to think about home visits and judgmental neighbors and all the ways this new life could still fall apart. That night, after Lila was asleep, Aisha sat by the fire again with her notebook. She couldn't shake the feeling that the treehouse was hiding something. The inconsistencies in the construction weren't accidents. They were intentional. Someone had built hidden spaces into this structure, and Aisha needed to know why. She ran her hands along the bookshelf again, pressing each panel, looking for mechanisms or hinges. Nothing. She examined the floorboard near the fireplace, the one that gave when pressed. She knelt down and worked her fingers around its edges, feeling for purchase. It was fitted tight, but not nailed, more like slotted in place. Using a butter knife from the kitchen, she pried gently at the edge. The board lifted slightly. Her heart began to pound. She worked the knife around the perimeter, loosening it bit by bit until finally the board came free. Beneath it was darkness. Aisha grabbed her flashlight and shone it into the gap. There was a space, maybe 8 in deep, running under several floorboards. And inside that space, something gleamed. She reached down carefully, fingers brushing metal. She pulled out a small tin box, the kind that might have once held cookies or tea. It was rusted at the corners, but intact. Her hand shook as she set it on the floor and carefully pried open the lid. Inside were papers, photographs, letters, and a small leather journal with a name embossed on the cover in faded gold letters. Elias Grant. Aisha's breath caught. That name meant something, something important. She'd heard it before, somewhere in her studies, some lecture about influential architects, but she couldn't quite place it. She opened the journal carefully. The first page was dated May 15, 1973. The handwriting was small, precise, beautiful. If you're reading this, then I've either succeeded or failed spectacularly. Either way, this treehouse stands as my true work. Not the buildings that made me famous, not the designs they praised and copied and commodified. This, my sanctuary, my laboratory, my masterpiece. Aisha's hands trembled as she turned the page. She'd found something, something important, something that might explain why this treehouse existed, why it was built with such care and hidden away like a secret. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Outside, the wind picked up, causing the treehouse to sway gently. The trees creaked their ancient song, and Aisha sat by firelight, reading the words of a man who disappeared 40 years ago. Slowly realizing that she hadn't just bought a treehouse, she'd bought a mystery that would change everything. Aisha barely slept that first week. Every night after Lila drifted off in the loft, she sat by the fire reading Elias Grant's journal. The entries were sporadic, jumping from philosophical observations about architecture to technical notes about load distribution, from poetry about living among the trees to bitter commentary about the commercial architecture world he'd abandoned. But one thing became clear. Elias Grant hadn't been some eccentric hermit. He'd been a visionary who'd walked away from fame to build something pure. The treehouse became their rhythm. Morning arrived with sunlight filtering through the canopy. Bird song replacing alarm clocks. Aisha would wake first, restart the fire that had burned low during the night, and boil water for instant coffee and oatmeal. Lila would climb down from the loft, still in her pajamas, and they'd eat breakfast watching the mist rise from the lake below. The view never got old. From their perch 30 feet up, they could see the water cutting through the valley, the mountains rising beyond, the whole world spread out like a painting. But leaving their sanctuary meant facing reality. Each morning, Aisha walked Lila down the swaying bridge to the school bus stop. And each morning, she felt the stares. Mothers in idling SUVs would watch without waving. Children would whisper and point. The bus driver, a heavyset man named Dale with a thick mustache, would shake his head slightly every time Lila climbed aboard like he was witnessing child abuse in real time. "How's school today?" Aisha would ask each afternoon when Lila returned. "Fine," Lila would say, but her eyes told different stories. Stories about kids who wouldn't sit with her at lunch. About girls who called her the tree girl and asked if she had to pee in the woods, about a teacher who'd asked in front of the whole class if she had running water at home. But Lila was tougher than Aisha had given her credit for. While other children crumbled under peer pressure, Lila seemed to draw strength from the isolation. She started bringing home leaves and pine cones, creating elaborate nature collages on the treehouse floor. She'd climb the branches around their home with fearless confidence, moving through the canopy like she'd been born to it. One evening, Aisha found her daughter sitting on a high branch, legs dangling, reading a book as casually as if she were on a park bench. "Be careful," Aisha called up. "I am," Lila said without looking down. "The trees tell me which branches are safe." Aisha's heart caught in her throat. But she didn't scold. Maybe this was what childhood should be. Wild, connected, brave, not bubble-wrapped and scheduled and afraid. The town of Riverside Bend, however, remained unimpressed. 2 weeks after they moved in, a black woman from County Child Services showed up. Her name was Monique Hargrove, and she had a clipboard, sensible shoes, and an expression that suggested she'd already made up her mind. Aisha walked her across the bridge, watching the woman grip the rope handrails with white knuckles. Inside, Monique examined everything with narrow eyes. She checked the smoke detectors Aisha had installed, tested the stove, looked at the composting toilet with barely concealed disgust, asked pointed questions about heating, insulation, emergency exits. Aisha answered each one calmly, professionally, pulling out her architecture credentials, showing the structural engineering reports she'd written herself, explaining load capacities and safety margins. "And where does the child sleep?" Monique asked. "The loft," Aisha said, pointing up. Monique climbed the ladder with difficulty, breathing heavily. She examined Lila's mattress, her stuffed animals arranged neatly. The fairy lights Aisha had strung along the rafters powered by a small solar battery. "What if there's a fire? How does she get down?" "There's a rope ladder that deploys from the loft directly to the ground," Aisha explained. "Fire code compliant, I had it custom made." "This is highly irregular," Monique said, descending the ladder. "I've never seen a child housed in a structure like this." "Irregular isn't illegal," Aisha said quietly. "My daughter is fed, clothed, educated, loved, and safe. That's what matters." Monique made notes on her clipboard. "I'll be filing a report. Someone will likely follow up." After she left, Aisha sat on the floor and let herself shake. They were trying to find reasons to take Lila away. She could feel it. The pressure building, the judgment solidifying into action. She had to prove them wrong. She had to make this work. Money became the next crisis. Aisha's savings evaporated within 3 weeks. She needed work. But Riverside Bend wasn't exactly a hotbed of architectural opportunities. The town had one small construction company, Whitaker Building, run by a man in his 60s named Jamal Whitaker. Aisha walked into his office on a grey Tuesday morning. Resume in hand. Jamal looked her over with skeptical eyes. He was built like a bulldog, short and broad, with calloused hands and sawdust permanently embedded in his flannel shirt. "You're the black woman living in the crazy treehouse." "That's right," Aisha said. "And you're an architect?" "Was am." "Yes." He glanced at her resume without interest. "Don't need an architect. Need framers, finish carpenters, someone who knows their way around a mitre saw." "I can do that," Aisha said. "You ever worked construction?" "I've done my own renovations and I understand buildings from the ground up. I can read blueprints, calculate loads, do finish work." Jamal leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Most architects I've met couldn't hammer a nail straight to save their lives. Too busy drawing pretty pictures." "Try me," Aisha said. "One day, if I can't do the work, don't pay me." Something in her desperation must have registered. Jamal sighed. "Got a job starting tomorrow. Addition on the Langston Place. Show up at 7 o'clock. Bring your own tools if you have them." Aisha showed up at 6:45 with a borrowed tool belt and determination that bordered on desperation. The crew consisted of 5 men, all local, all skeptical. They gave her the grunt work at first, hauling lumber, cleaning up, fetching tools. She did it without complaint, watching how they worked, learning their rhythm. By the 3rd day, Jamal let her frame out a window. She measured twice, cut once, fitted the pieces together with precision that made Jamal raise his eyebrows. By the end of the week, she was working alongside the crew, and they'd stopped making jokes about the architect playing carpenter. The work was hard, physical in a way her office job had never been. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her shoulders ached. She'd come home after dark, muscles screaming, and have just enough energy to make dinner for Lila before collapsing. But the paychecks, small as they were, kept them afloat. October bled into November, and the temperatures dropped. Aisha spent her evenings winterizing the treehouse. She sealed gaps with caulk and expanding foam, installed weather stripping around the door, hung heavy curtains over the windows, stocked firewood under a tarp on the platform. The treehouse stayed surprisingly warm, warmer than it should have given the circumstances. The wall seemed to hold heat in a way that didn't quite make sense. One evening, while installing insulation in a small gap she'd found beneath the kitchen counter, Aisha discovered something odd. Behind the cabinet, the wall wasn't standard construction. Instead of 2x4 studs on 16 inches centers, there was something else. She pulled out the cabinet completely, shining her flashlight into the cavity. The wall was double-layered. There was an exterior wall she could see, and behind it about 6 in back another wall. The gap between them was filled with some kind of dense material. Not modern insulation, but something older. Sawdust mixed with clay maybe, or paper pulp. Whatever it was, it explained the superior insulation. But why build a double wall? Why go to that trouble? She thought about Elias's journal, still hidden under the loose floorboard. He'd written about building within building, about spaces between spaces. At the time, she'd thought it was philosophical. Now she wondered if he'd been literal. Aisha began mapping the treehouse more carefully. She measured every room, every wall, every corner. She sketched it out in her notebook, comparing interior dimensions to exterior footprints. The inconsistencies grew more obvious. The eastern wall was too thick. The northern corner had dead space. The loft was smaller than the roof structure suggested. Everywhere she looked, she found missing square footage. It was during one of these measuring sessions that she met Etta. Aisha was outside using a tape measure to check the exterior wall lengths when she heard a voice from below. "You're going to fall if you're not careful." She looked down to see an elderly black woman standing at the base of the tree, one hand shading her eyes. The woman was probably in her late 70s or early 80s, with white hair pulled into a loose bun and a face mapped with wrinkles, her deep brown skin glowing warmly in the sunlight. She wore a purple cardigan despite the cold and leaned on a wooden walking stick. "I'm being careful," Aisha called down. That's what Elias used to say, too. Aisha's heart stuttered. She climbed down the ladder quickly, dropping the last few feet to the ground. "You knew Elias Grant?" The old woman smiled. "I'm Etta Washington. I live about a quarter-mile down the road. And yes, I knew Elias quite well, actually. Can you tell me about him?" Aisha asked, trying to keep the eagerness out of her voice. "No one in town talks about him. It's like he's been erased." Etta's expression darkened. "That's because most folks around here thought he was crazy and dangerous. And when he disappeared, they were almost relieved. Made it easier to forget." She looked up at the treehouse. Her eyes distant. "But I remembered. Someone had to. Would you like to come up?" Aisha asked. "I can make tea." Etta laughed. "Child, I'm 83 years old. I haven't climbed a rope bridge in 6 decades, but if you want to hear about Elias, come visit me tomorrow afternoon. If you're free, I'll put on a pot of soup." The next day was Sunday. Aisha left Lila drawing in the treehouse and walked down the road to Etta's house. It was a small cottage with a garden gone to seed for winter and smoke curling from the chimney. Etta answered the door before Aisha could knock. Come in," she said, "soup's ready, and I made cornbread." The house was warm and cluttered in the way old people's houses often are, filled with books and knickknacks and photographs covering every surface. Etta served soup at a kitchen table scarred with decades of use, and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Aisha worked up the courage to ask, "How did you know Elias?" Etta set down her spoon. "I was his assistant back in the 70s before he left the firm in Seattle. I was fresh out of secretarial school and Elias needed someone to organize his chaos. He was brilliant but scattered. Could design a building in his head but couldn't remember to pay the electric bill." "What was he like?" "Passionate," Etta said. "Obsessive. He believed architecture should be more than just functional. He wanted buildings that breathed with people, that adapted and grew. But the commercial world, they just wanted him to make them rich. They'd take his ideas and strip them down to the cheapest possible version. It broke his heart. So he left in 1972. Yes. Walked away from a 7-figure contract and disappeared into these woods. Everyone thought he'd lost his mind, but I understood. He needed to build something pure, something that couldn't be compromised or commercialized. So, he built that treehouse. Aisha leaned forward. What do you know about its construction? About the hidden spaces? Etta's eye sharpened. You found them. Some of them, Aisha admitted. But I don't understand why. Why build secret rooms in a treehouse? Etta stood slowly and walked to a bookshelf. She pulled down a heavy photo album and brought it back to the table. Inside were black and white photographs from the 1970s. Elias, as a younger man, lean and intense with shoulder-length hair and eyes that seemed to burn through the camera, photos of the treehouse in various stages of construction, and photos of Etta herself, younger, standing beside Elias, both of them smiling. Elias believed buildings could hold secrets, Etta said quietly. Not just physical secrets, but conceptual ones. He built that treehouse as a prototype for something revolutionary. Affordable housing that worked with nature instead of against it. Structures that could be built almost anywhere by anyone using sustainable materials. He thought if he perfected the design, he could change the world. What happened to him? Etta's face clouded. I don't know. In 1984, he just vanished. Some people think he finally went completely crazy and wandered into the woods. Others think he had enemies. People from his old life who wanted his designs. I think, she paused, her voice dropping. I think he found what he was looking for and moved on. But he left his work behind. He left it for someone who would understand. Why didn't you tell anyone? Aisha asked. Why keep it secret? Because Elias made me promise, Etta said. He said the world wasn't ready. That people would either destroy it or exploit it. He wanted it hidden until the right person came along. Someone who needed it as much as it needed them. She reached across the table and patted Aisha's hand. I think that might be you, dear. Aisha felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know if I'm the right person. I'm just trying to survive. That's exactly why you're right, Etta said. Elias's work wasn't for the wealthy or the powerful. It was for people like you, people who needed shelter and hope and a second chance. They talked for 2 more hours. Etta showed her more photographs, told her stories about Elias's theories and dreams. When Aisha finally left, she carried the photo album borrowed with strict instructions to return it undamaged and a head full of possibilities. Back at the treehouse, Lila was where Aisha had left her, now reading by the fire. Where'd you go? To visit a neighbor, Aisha said. Someone who knew the man who built our home. Lila looked up with interest. What was he like? Magic, Aisha said. I think he was magic. That night, after Lila was asleep, Aisha pulled out Elias's journal again. She read with new understanding, seeing his words through Etta's stories. He hadn't just been building a treehouse. He'd been building a manifesto in wood and stone. Each hidden space had purpose. Each unusual feature was an innovation. The double walls provided superior insulation with natural materials. The loft design maximized space while maintaining structural integrity. Even the suspension bridge was engineered to sway with wind rather than fight it, reducing stress on the anchor points. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. November became December, and the first snow fell. Lila stood on the platform, arms spread wide, catching flakes on her tongue. It's like living in a snow globe, she said, and Aisha had to agree. The treehouse in winter was magical. The trees held snow in their branches like cotton, and the world below went quiet and soft. But winter also brought new challenges. The road became treacherous with ice. Getting to the bus stop meant careful navigation down slippery paths. The fire became essential, not optional. And Aisha spent hours each day managing it, feeding it, making sure they didn't freeze. The work from Jamal Whitaker slowed as weather made outdoor construction difficult. Money got tight again. Aisha started taking on whatever side work she could find. She fixed a neighbor's shed door, built custom shelving for the general store, repaired a deck that was sagging. Word spread slowly that the architect tree lady actually knew what she was doing, and jobs trickled in. Not enough to thrive, but enough to survive. Through it all, the treehouse kept its secrets. Aisha found more hidden compartments. A space behind the bathroom wall, a gap above the ceiling beams. Each one was empty, as if waiting to be filled. She began to suspect that Elias had designed the entire structure as a puzzle box with layers of discovery built into its bones. It was a storm in mid-December that finally revealed the truth. The weather forecast had called for heavy rain, but that was an understatement. The storm rolled in from the coast with the fury of something biblical. Wind bent the trees almost double. Rain fell in sheets so thick Aisha couldn't see 10 feet beyond the windows. The treehouse swayed like a ship at sea. And for the first time since moving in, Aisha felt afraid. "Mama," Lila called from the loft, her voice tight with fear. "It's okay, baby," Aisha called back, though she wasn't sure it was. "The trees know how to bend in the wind. We're safe." The power, minimal as it was from their small solar setup, died within an hour. Aisha lit candles and oil lamps. The fire roared in the hearth, and shadows danced on the walls. Thunder shook the world. Lightning turned night to day in split-second bursts, and still the treehouse held. It was around midnight when Aisha heard it. A crack like a gunshot followed by a tremendous crash. Something had fallen, a branch, or maybe a whole tree. She ran to the window, but could see nothing in the darkness and rain. Then she noticed water. It was seeping through the eastern wall near the bookshelf. A dark stain spreading across the wood. Aisha grabbed towels and pressed them against the leak, but it was no use. The water kept coming, running down the wall in rivulets. "Stay in the loft," she called to Lila. "Don't come down." She moved the bookshelf away from the wall. Books tumbling to the floor. Behind it, she could see the damage. A section of the exterior wall had split, probably from a falling branch, and water was pouring through. But as she examined the split by lamplight, she saw something else. The wall wasn't just broken. It was opening. The split had revealed a seam she'd never noticed before, and water pressure was forcing it wider. Aisha grabbed a crowbar from her toolkit and, acting on instinct, pried at the seam. The panel gave way with a groan. Behind it was darkness. Nate, something impossible. The secret room was larger than she'd imagined, maybe 10 foot x 12 feet, with a low ceiling and walls lined with shelves and cabinets. And on those shelves were hundreds of rolled papers, blueprints, designs, models, a lifetime of work hidden away like treasure. Aisha stepped inside. Her wet clothes forgotten, the storm forgotten, everything forgotten except this moment of discovery. The room smelled of old paper and cedar. Her hands trembled as she unrolled the first blueprint. It was a housing design, compact and elegant, built around a central tree. The next was similar but different, adapted for hillsides, another for wetlands, another for desert climates. She unrolled design after design, each one more brilliant than the last. Elias hadn't just built a treehouse. He'd used it to prototype an entire philosophy of sustainable architecture. Each hidden space in the main room corresponded to a design innovation. The double walls, the natural insulation, the water collection system she'd never noticed. The way the structure worked with the trees instead of against them. It was all here, documented in meticulous detail. And then she found the letter. It was in an envelope marked to whoever comes next in Elias's distinctive handwriting. Aisha opened it with shaking fingers. "If you found this room, then you've earned what's inside it. These designs are my life's work. They represent everything I believe about how humans should live in harmony with the natural world." I've hidden them because the world wasn't ready, because people would have stripped them down, cheapened them, turned them into profit instead of progress. But maybe you're different. Maybe you are someone who understands that architecture isn't about ego or money. It's about shelter and dignity and giving people a place to belong. If that's you, then take these designs, build them, share them, make them better. The treehouse you're living in is the proof of concept. Every innovation I've drawn here has been tested in these walls. The construction methods, the materials, the systems that make it work. It's all functional, all affordable, all possible. I may be gone, but the work remains. Don't let it die in darkness. Bring it into the light. Aisha sat on the floor of the secret room, surrounded by 40 years of hidden genius, and wept. She wept for Elias, who'd sacrificed everything to protect his vision. She wept for herself, for the architect she'd been, and the carpenter she'd become. She wept for Lila, sleeping in the loft while history was being rewritten below. And she wept with something like joy, because she'd found it. The answer to why this treehouse existed, why she'd been drawn to it, why everything in her life had fallen apart, only to lead her here. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, in a secret room that had waited 40 years to be discovered, Aisha Thompson held blueprints for changing the world, and finally understood what it meant to have purpose. The morning after the storm arrived, pale and exhausted, like the world itself needed rest, Aisha hadn't slept. She'd spent the entire night in the secret room, reading by flashlight and lamp, unrolling blueprint after blueprint. Her architect's brain trying to process the magnitude of what she'd found. Lila had come down from the loft around dawn, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mama, you're still awake?" Aisha looked up from a design for modular treehouse units that could be connected like puzzle pieces. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but her mind was electric. "Baby, come look at this." Lila climbed through the hidden door, her small form fitting easily through the opening Aisha had widened. The girl's eyes went wide as she took in the secret room. "Whoa, it's like a treasure cave." "It is treasure," Aisha said softly. "Just not the kind most people recognize." They sat together on the floor, surrounded by decades of work. Aisha explained as best she could, translating architectural concepts into language a 7-year-old could grasp. "The man who built our home. He invented new ways to make houses. Ways that don't hurt the earth. Ways that people who don't have much money could still have beautiful, safe places to live." "Like us," Lila said. "Like us," Aisha agreed, her throat tight. "He hid all of this here, waiting for someone to find it. And you found it." Lila beamed with pride. "Because you're an architect, too." Aisha pulled her daughter close. "We found it. This is ours now. Yours and mine. And we have to decide what to do with it." Over the next week, Aisha became obsessed. She catalogued every design, every drawing, every note Elias had left behind. There were 73 complete housing designs. Each one adapted to different climates and terrains. Tree houses, yes, but also earth berms, water houses built on stilts, structures that used recycled materials, and passive solar heating. Each design was accompanied by detailed construction notes, material lists, cost estimates from the 1970s that would need updating, but proved these weren't fantasy projects. They were buildable, practical, revolutionary. She found more journals, too, tucked in drawers and hidden in sealed tubes. Elias's voice came through the pages, passionate and frustrated and brilliant. He'd been born in 1938 in rural Montana, the son of a carpenter and a school teacher. He'd studied architecture at the University of Washington on scholarship, graduated in 1961, and quickly made a name for himself designing innovative commercial buildings in Seattle. By the late 1960s, he was famous. His buildings won awards. Magazines featured his work. Wealthy clients competed for his services. But Elias had become disillusioned. In one journal entry from 1971, he'd written, "They take my designs and gut them. Remove everything innovative, everything alive, anything that costs an extra $1. Then they slap my name on the hollowed-out corpse and call it progress." I'm complicit in the lie. I'm helping rich people get richer while the world burns and poor people can't afford roofs over their heads. I can't do this anymore. He'd walked away from a contract worth $300,000, a fortune in 1972, and disappeared into the Oregon woods. The architecture world had been shocked. Some called it a breakdown. Others called it a publicity stunt. Most just moved on, forgot about him, filled the void he left with the next rising star. But Elias hadn't broken down. He'd been building for 12 years from 1972 to 1984. He'd lived in this treehouse and created the most important work of his life. Work no one knew existed. Aisha sat at her kitchen table surrounded by notebooks where she'd been sketching and calculating. The designs weren't just beautiful, they were practical. A family of four could live in one of Elias's tree homes for a material cost of under $15,000 in modern money. The construction techniques required minimal heavy equipment, meaning they could be built in remote areas. They used renewable resources, collected rainwater, generated power through small solar arrays and micro-hydro systems. They were everything modern sustainable architecture aspired to be. Designed 40 years before it became trendy. This could change everything, Aisha whispered to the empty room. But who would believe her? She was a disgraced architect living in a treehouse, mocked by her community, barely scraping by. If she walked into a developer's office or a city planning meeting with Elias's designs, they'd laugh her out of the building. She needed credibility. She needed proof. She needed help. She thought of Etta. The old black woman had known Elias, had worked with him, had kept his secrets for decades. Aisha bundled up against the December cold and walked down the road to Etta's cottage. The older woman opened the door before Aisha could knock, as if she'd been expecting her. "You found the room," Etta said. It wasn't a question. The storm broke through the wall. There are blueprints, journals, decades of work. Etta's eyes filled with tears. I wondered if they were still there. I haven't been able to climb up to check in years. Come in, child. We have much to discuss. Over tea at Etta's kitchen table, the full story emerged. Etta had been more than Elias's assistant. She'd been his collaborator, his sounding board, his closest friend. When he'd left Seattle, she'd followed, taking early retirement to help him with his life's work. For 12 years, she'd lived in a small cabin on what was now her property, bringing Elias supplies, helping him test designs, documenting everything. Why did he disappear? Aisha asked. The journals stop in 1984. Etta's face clouded. Because they found him. A development company called Cascade Holdings. They'd been buying up land in this area, planning some massive resort project. Elias's property was right in the middle of their plans and he refused to sell. They offered him money, lots of it, but he said no. The treehouse was his laboratory. He couldn't abandon it. What happened? They got aggressive. Men in suits started showing up, making threats. Then it got worse. Equipment failures, mysterious fires in the woods nearby, his supply deliveries getting lost. Elias started getting paranoid. Said they were surveilling him. I thought maybe he was imagining things. But then someone broke into my cabin, trashed the place, looking for something. That's when Elias decided to hide everything. The secret room was his insurance policy. And then he disappeared, Aisha said. Etta nodded slowly. January 15, 1985. He told me he was going to confront Cascade Holdings directly, that he had evidence they were behind the harassment. I begged him not to go, but Elias could be stubborn. He never came back. The police investigated, found nothing, no body, no evidence of foul play, nothing. Eventually, they declared him a missing person and closed the case. You think Cascade killed him? I think they made him disappear, Etta said. Whether that meant killing him or paying him to vanish, I don't know. But Elias would never have abandoned his work voluntarily. Never. Aisha felt cold despite the warm kitchen. Is Cascade Holdings still around? Oh, yes, Etta said darkly. They never did build their resort. Environmental regulations killed the project in the late 80s, but the company's still active, still buying property, still operating in the Pacific Northwest. They've tried to buy Elias's land a dozen times over the years, made me offers too for my property. I've refused every time. They know about the treehouse. They know something's there, Etta corrected. But they don't know what. The property's been in legal limbo so long. They probably thought whatever Elias built had rotted away. When you bought it, I'm sure they noticed. As if summoned by their conversation, there was a knock at Etta's door. The old black woman's face went pale. I'm not expecting anyone. Aisha stood and looked through the window. A black SUV sat in the driveway. A man in an expensive coat stood on the porch holding a briefcase. He knocked again harder. Etta gripped Aisha's arm. Don't answer it. But the man called out, Miss Washington, I know you're home. I just want to talk about a business opportunity. Aisha made a decision. She opened the door, facing the man with her chin raised. Etta isn't interested in whatever you're selling. The man looked surprised to see her. Then his expression shifted to recognition. You must be Aisha Thompson, the new owner of the Grant property. It's just called the Treehouse, Aisha said. Ah, but we both know it's more than that, don't we? The man smiled. And it didn't reach his eyes. My name is Richard Vance. I'm a land acquisition specialist with Cascade Holdings. I'd like to discuss purchasing both your property and Miss Washington's. We're prepared to offer very generous terms. Not interested, Aisha said, moving to close the door. Richard's hand shot out, stopping it. Miss Thompson, I don't think you understand your situation. You're living in a structure that's probably not up to code. You have a child in what could be considered an unsafe environment. County Services has already filed concerns. It would be unfortunate if those concerns escalated. Much easier to just sell the property, take the money, and move somewhere more suitable. The threat was clear. Aisha felt anger surge through her. Are you seriously threatening me? Threatening my daughter? I'm offering you a solution, Richard said smoothly. $750,000 for your 3 acres. That's more than generous for raw land with a derelict structure. You could buy a real house, give your daughter a normal life. Get off this property. Etta's voice came from behind Aisha, sharp as broken glass. And don't come back. Richard's smile turned cold. You're both making a mistake. Cascade Holdings doesn't give up when we want something. We have resources, connections, patience. You'll sell eventually. Everyone does. He handed Aisha a business card. When you're ready to be reasonable, call me. He walked back to his SUV and drove away, leaving them standing in the doorway. Aisha's hands were shaking with rage and fear. She looked at the card. Richard Vance, Senior Acquisition Specialist, Cascade Holdings. There was a phone number and an email address. They're going to come after us, Aisha said. They've been coming after this land for 40 years, Etta replied. They haven't won yet. But Aisha could see the worry in the old black woman's eyes. Cascade had resources. They had lawyers and money and apparently no ethics. What did Aisha have? A treehouse full of blueprints that no one knew existed and a history of losing everything she'd ever fought for. That night, Aisha sat in the secret room, reading through more of Elias's journals by lamplight. She found an entry from December 1984, just weeks before he vanished. They're closing in. I can feel it. Vance came by again today. Said Cascade would make my life hell if I didn't sell. Said accidents happen in these woods, that it would be tragic if something happened to Etta or to me. I've hidden everything that matters. If they take the land, they won't get the work. That's what's important. The work survives. Someone will find it someday. Someone who needs it like I needed it. Someone who will know what to do with it. Aisha closed the journal and looked around the secret room. Elias had built this place as a fortress, a vault, a time capsule. He'd known he might not survive to share his vision, so he'd hidden it where only someone who truly understood architecture would find it. Someone desperate enough to buy a crazy treehouse. Someone stubborn enough to stay despite the mockery. Someone who'd investigate the inconsistencies and strange measurements and hidden spaces. He'd hidden it for someone like her. The realization hit like lightning. This wasn't just about preserving Elias's work. This was about finishing it, about taking his revolutionary designs and bringing them into the world. About proving that affordable, sustainable housing was possible, about changing the conversation around poverty and shelter and dignity. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed allies, support, credibility. She needed people to believe in what Elias had created, and she needed to move fast before Cascade Holdings found a way to take it all away. Aisha spent the next 3 days photographing every design, every page of every journal, every scrap of paper in the secret room. She uploaded everything to cloud storage, made multiple backup drives, and hid copies in different locations. If Cascade came for the originals, at least the work would survive digitally. Then she started reaching out. She contacted her old professors from architecture school, the ones who'd believed in her before Marcus's family destroyed her reputation. She sent emails to sustainable housing nonprofits, to environmental groups, to anyone who might care about affordable housing solutions. Most didn't respond. Some sent polite rejections, but a few, a crucial few, wrote back with interest. One name kept coming up in her research. Professor Nia Brooks at Portland State University. She'd written extensively about sustainable architecture and housing inequality. Aisha sent her a carefully worded email, not revealing too much, but hinting at significant historical architectural documents related to Elias Grant. The response came within hours. Elias Grant. The Elias Grant. I wrote my dissertation on his early work. He disappeared in the 80s. Are you saying you found something of his? I need to see this immediately. They arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Portland. Aisha asked Jamal Whitaker for a day off, promising to make up the hours. She borrowed Etta's car, not trusting her own vehicle for the 2-hour drive. Lila stayed with Etta, who'd offered to teach her how to bake bread. Professor Brooks was in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair and intense dark eyes, her rich brown skin radiating quiet authority. She arrived carrying a worn leather bag and an expression of barely contained excitement. Aisha had brought one of Elias's journals and a selection of blueprints carefully chosen to show the scope of his work without revealing everything. Nia's hands trembled as she examined the documents. "My God," she whispered. "This is his handwriting. These are original designs I've never seen before. Where did you find these?" Aisha took a breath. "I bought property that used to belong to him. The treehouse he built in the 70s. These were hidden inside." "Hidden?" Nia repeated. "For 40 years. There's more," Aisha said. 73 complete housing designs, journals spanning 12 years, construction notes, material lists, cost analyses. It's his entire post-commercial career, documented and preserved. Nia looked up, her eyes bright with tears. "Do you understand what this means?" Elias Grant was a visionary. His disappearance was one of the great mysteries of 20th century architecture. If this work exists, if it's as comprehensive as you're saying, it could reshape how we think about sustainable, affordable housing. "I know," Aisha said, "but there's a problem. A development company called Cascade Holdings has been trying to buy the land. They threatened me. Said they'd use county services to take my daughter if I didn't sell. I think they're the reason Elias disappeared." Nia's expression hardened. Cascade Holdings. I know that name. They've been involved in several controversial developments. They have a reputation for aggressive tactics. She closed the journal carefully. You need legal protection and you need to go public with this fast. Once the academic community knows this work exists, it becomes much harder for Cascade to make it disappear. I don't have money for lawyers, Aisha admitted. I'm barely surviving as it is. Leave that to me. Nia said. I have connections. There are non-profits that provide legal aid for preservation cases, and I know journalists who'd kill for this story. A missing architect's hidden masterwork discovered by a single black mother living in his treehouse. That's national news. Aisha felt a flutter of hope mixed with fear. Going public meant exposure, judgment, scrutiny, but it also meant protection. Cascade couldn't make her disappear if the whole world was watching. There's something else, Aisha said. I'm an architect, too. Or I was. I lost my license, my job, everything in a divorce. But I understand Elias's work. I can see how brilliant it is, how revolutionary these designs could actually work. They could be built today, right now, and they'd solve problems we're still struggling with. Nia studied her. What's your name? Aisha. Aisha Thompson. Aisha Thompson. Nia repeated like she was testing how it sounded. Would you be willing to present this work, to speak publicly about what you found? I'm nobody, Aisha said. I'm just a black woman living in a treehouse who got lucky. You're the person Elias Grant's work chose. Nia corrected. You found it. You preserved it. You recognized its importance. That makes you exactly the right person to bring it into the world. She leaned forward. I'm organizing a symposium on sustainable housing in March. 3 months from now, every major architect, developer, and policy maker in the Pacific Northwest will be there. I want you to present Elias's work. I want you to show them what's possible. Aisha's heart raced. I can't. I'm not qualified. I don't have credentials anymore. You have something better, Nia said. You have the work itself. And you have a story people will listen to. The disgraced architect who found redemption in a treehouse. The single black mother who discovered a treasure. The guardian of a dead man's dream. That story has power. Aisha, use it. The drive back to Riverside Bend felt surreal. Aisha's mind spun with possibilities and fears. A symposium, going public, taking on Cascade Holdings. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She stopped at Etta's to pick up Lila and found them covered in flour, laughing over a slightly lopsided loaf of bread. We made it ourselves, Lila announced proudly. From scratch. Etta looked at Aisha's face and knew something had changed. After Lila ran outside to play in the snow, Etta asked what happened. Aisha told her everything about Nia Brooks, about the symposium, about the plan to go public with Elias's work. Etta listened in silence, her weathered hands folded on the table. Elias would have liked you, she said finally. He always said the work would find its way to the right hands. I think he was right. I'm scared, Aisha admitted. Cascade has power, money, lawyers. What if they find a way to take it all? Etta reached across the table and gripped Aisha's hand. Then we fight. I'm too old to be afraid anymore. And you? You're stronger than you think. You've survived this long. You've protected that child. You've kept Elias's work safe without even knowing what it was. That takes courage or stupidity. Aisha said with a weak laugh. Sometimes they're the same thing, Etta replied with a smile. That night, back in the treehouse, Aisha stood in the secret room surrounded by Elias's legacy. She thought about the man who'd built this place, who'd sacrificed fame and fortune to create something pure, who'd hidden his life's work and then disappeared, trusting that somehow, someday it would matter. She thought about herself a year ago, standing in a divorce lawyer's office, losing everything she'd built. How impossible it had seemed that life would ever be anything but surviving. And she thought about Lila, asleep in the loft, thriving in this treehouse despite everything, growing strong and brave and wild. Proof that unconventional didn't mean wrong. Aisha pulled out her phone and took a photo of the secret room. The shelves lined with rolled blueprints, the decades of innovation waiting to be shared. She posted it to social media with a simple caption. Sometimes the most important work happens in secret. Sometimes it takes 40 years to be discovered. This is the hidden legacy of architect Elias Grant, and it's about to change everything. By morning, the post had been shared 3,000 times. By afternoon, journalists were calling. By evening, the story was national news. The missing architect's hidden masterwork. The single black mother who found a fortune in blueprints. The treehouse that held secrets for 4 decades. And somewhere in an office building, Richard Vance from Cascade Holdings was learning that the property he'd been threatening to take had just become the most famous treehouse in America, which meant taking it quietly had just become impossible. Aisha stood on her platform, watching the sunset paint the winter sky in shades of orange and gold, and allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could actually win this fight. Because she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Elias's vision, for Etta's loyalty, for Lila's future, and for every person who'd ever been told that affordable, beautiful, sustainable housing was impossible. The blueprints proved otherwise, and now the world was going to see them. The morning after the story went viral, she woke to find 17 news vans parked along the dirt road leading to the treehouse. Reporters with cameras and microphones clustered at the base of the trees, shouting questions up at her platform. Her phone had died overnight from the constant notifications. And when she plugged it in, it immediately began buzzing like an angry hornet. "Mama, what's all that?" Lila asked, peeking through the window. Aisha's stomach churned with anxiety. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? Attention, protection through visibility. But she hadn't expected it to happen so fast, so overwhelmingly. "They want to know about the treehouse," she said. "About what we found." She dressed carefully in her cleanest jeans and the flannel shirt that made her look most like someone who knew what they were doing. Then she climbed down to face the chaos. The moment her feet touched the long old ground, the questions started flying. "Miss Thompson, is it true you discovered lost architectural designs worth millions? How did you know where to look? What was your relationship with Elias Grant? Are you planning to sell the designs?" Aisha held up her hands and the crowd quieted slightly. "I'll make a statement, but then I need you all to leave. My daughter has school and this is private property," she explained as simply as she could. How she bought the property, found the hidden room, discovered Elias's work. She emphasized that she wasn't selling anything, that the designs were meant to be shared, not hoarded, that Elias had wanted them to help people who needed affordable housing. "But you could be sitting on tens of millions of dollars," one reporter pressed. "These are historically significant documents. Museums would pay." "They are not for sale," Aisha said firmly. Elias Grant didn't hide his work so someone could profit from it. He hid it so it would survive until the right time. That time is now. A reporter from the local Riverside Bend Gazette, a black woman named Keisha, whom Aisha recognized from the grocery store, asked, "Do you plan to stay in the treehouse? There have been concerns about whether it's appropriate housing for a child." Aisha looked directly at the camera. "This treehouse is the safest, most thoughtfully designed home my daughter and I have ever lived in. It was built by a genius who understood that housing should work with nature, not against it. We're not leaving." The press conference, if it could be called that, lasted 20 minutes. Then Aisha politely but firmly asked everyone to go. Some lingered, but Jamal Whitaker showed up with 2 of his construction crew, and their presence was enough to encourage the stragglers to pack up. Jamal approached Aisha after the last van drove away. "Saw you on the news this morning," he said. "Whole town's talking." Aisha braced herself. "I know it looks crazy. Looks brave." Jamal interrupted. "Takes guts to stand up to Cascade Holdings. They've been pushing people around this county for decades." He paused, adjusting his work belt. "That offer still stands. The one where you said you'd teach me about those sustainable building techniques, because if you're planning to actually build any of those designs, I want in." Aisha felt tears prick her eyes. "Seriously?" "Seriously," Jamal said. "Been building houses the same way for 40 years. Might be time to learn something new." Over the next week, the story exploded beyond regional news. National networks picked it up. Architecture magazines published retrospectives on Elias Grant's early work alongside speculation about what his hidden designs might contain. Nia Brooks appeared on morning talk shows explaining the historical significance. And through it all, Aisha's phone never stopped ringing. But neither did Cascade Holdings' campaign. 3 days after the story broke, Aisha received a certified letter. It was from a law firm in Seattle representing Cascade Holdings. They claimed that Elias Grant's work was created while he was under contract with firms they'd subsequently acquired, making the designs their intellectual property. They demanded immediate access to the treehouse and all documents within, or they'd seek a court order. Aisha called Nia in a panic. Can they do this? Can they just claim ownership? They can try, Nia said. But intellectual property law is complicated, especially when dealing with work created over 40 years ago by someone who's legally dead. I'm connecting you with a lawyer who specializes in this. Her name is Lena Hayes, and she's very good. Lena Hayes was indeed very good. She was in her 30s, sharp as a blade, and deeply offended by Cascade's tactics. She took Aisha's case pro bono, calling it a matter of cultural preservation and housing justice. Within 2 days, she'd filed counter-motions, arguing that Elias had created the designs after leaving his commercial contracts, that he'd explicitly hidden them to prevent corporate exploitation, and that Aisha, as the legal owner of the property, had every right to the contents. This is going to get ugly, Lena warned during a video call. Cascade doesn't want these designs public because they prove affordable, sustainable housing is possible. That threatens their entire business model of building cheap, identical subdivisions. They'll fight hard. Let them fight, Aisha said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. The town of Riverside Bend began to shift like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface. At first, it was subtle. People stopped crossing the street when they saw Aisha in town. The cashier at the general store started making eye contact again. Then it became more obvious. A black woman approached her in the parking lot of the post office. I'm sorry, the woman said. She was young, maybe late 20s, with a baby on her hip. I was one of the people who judged you, who thought you were crazy for living in that treehouse with your daughter. But I saw you on TV, and I realized you weren't crazy. You were just braver than the rest of us. More apologies followed. The black mothers from the women's community group showed up at Etta's house where Aisha was visiting with a basket of muffins and shamefaced expressions. Jasmine, the one who'd led the delegation months ago, spoke for them. We were wrong, she said simply. We thought we were protecting the community, but we were just being small-minded. What you've done, sharing those designs, trying to help people, that's actual community service. We're sorry. Aisha accepted the apology, though part of her wanted to remind them how quickly they'd turned on her, how willing they'd been to call child services. But grace, she was learning, was more powerful than grudges. Thank you, she said. That means a lot. The school shifted, too. Lila came home one afternoon bubbling with excitement. Mama, the teacher asked me to do a presentation about our house. She said it's historically important. The same teacher who'd once asked in front of the class if they had running water now wanted Lila to present. Aisha helped her daughter create a simple slideshow with photos of the treehouse, pictures of Elias's blueprints, and drawings Lila had made of her favorite parts of their home. The presentation was supposed to last 10 minutes. The class asked so many questions it went for 45. Children who'd called her tree girl as an insult now asked if they could come over and see the secret room. Parents who'd whispered about child endangerment requested tours. The principal invited Aisha to speak at an assembly about following your dreams and thinking differently. She declined. Not ready for that level of exposure. But the invitation itself felt like vindication. Jamal Whitaker hired Aisha full-time as his sustainable design consultant. Her first project was redesigning a low-income housing development the county had commissioned. Instead of the standard rectangular boxes Jamal usually built, Aisha adapted one of Elias's designs, creating clustered units around a central courtyard with shared green space, solar panels, and rainwater collection. The county planning board nearly rejected it as too unconventional, but Nia Brooke showed up to the meeting with a presentation on long-term cost savings and environmental impact. The board approved it unanimously, but Cascade Holdings wasn't giving up. In February, Richard Vance returned, this time with 3 other men in expensive suits and a binder full of documentation. Aisha met them on the ground, refusing to let them up into the treehouse. Etta stood beside her, and Jamal Whitaker lurked nearby with his arms crossed, looking intimidating. "Miss Thompson," Richard began, his smile practiced and empty. "We've been reviewing property records, and we've discovered some interesting things. The original survey of this land from 1972 contains errors. The eastern boundary is actually 15 feet further west than your deed indicates. That means a portion of your treehouse, including the platform and bridge, are built on land that legally belongs to the adjacent parcel." Aisha's blood ran cold. "What adjacent parcel?" Richard's smile widened. "The one Cascade Holdings purchased in 1983. We've been very patient, but you're technically trespassing on our property. We'll need you to remove the encroaching structures within 30 days or we'll seek a court order to have them removed." "That's bullshit," Jamal growled. "That treehouse has been there for 50 years. Adverse possession alone has a 7-year requirement in Oregon, which would apply if Miss Thompson had been living here that long," Richard interrupted. "But she's only owned the property for 4 months. The clock resets with new ownership." Lena Hayes filed an emergency motion to halt any action while the survey discrepancy was investigated, but it meant more legal fees, more stress, more uncertainty. Aisha lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Cascade would find a way to destroy the treehouse entirely. If they couldn't have Elias's designs, maybe they'd rather see the whole thing torn down than let her keep it. The symposium in March arrived like a deadline and a lifeline simultaneously. Nia had arranged for Aisha to present during the keynote session, prime time, in front of over 800 architects, developers, city planners, and housing advocates. Aisha had never been more terrified. She drove to Portland the day before with Lila and Etta, who insisted on coming for moral support. Nia had reserved them a hotel room paid for by the symposium sponsors. Lila thought staying in a hotel was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to her. Jumping on the beds and ordering room service like a tiny queen. That night, Aisha practiced her presentation, and for the 100th time, she decided to tell the truth. All of it. Not just about finding Elias's work, but about her own fall from grace. About losing everything and buying a treehouse out of desperation, about being mocked and judged and threatened, because if she was going to advocate for affordable housing, she needed to speak from lived experience, not theoretical knowledge. The morning of the presentation, Aisha dressed in clothes Nia had helped her buy. Professional but not pretentious. A simple black dress, a blazer, comfortable shoes. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. She looked like an architect again, like someone who belonged in professional spaces, like someone who had something important to say. The auditorium was enormous, seats rising in steep tiers, lights bright enough to make her squint. Aisha stood backstage, hands shaking while Nia introduced her. Aisha Thompson's story is one of resilience, discovery, and vision. She's here today not just to share the remarkable work of Elias Grant, but to challenge us to think differently about housing, sustainability, and who gets to participate in architectural innovation. Aisha walked onto the stage to polite applause. She looked out at hundreds of faces and fought the urge to run. Then she saw Etta and Lila in the third row, both giving her thumbs up. She took a breath and began. "A year ago, I lost everything," she said, "my marriage, my job, my home, my reputation. I was a licensed architect working for a prestigious Portland firm. And within 6 months, I was unemployed, nearly homeless, and being told I was a bad mother because I couldn't afford better housing. I bought a treehouse for $12,000 because it was all I had left. People laughed at me. They called me crazy. They tried to take my daughter away." The room had gone silent. Aisha advanced her slideshow, showing the first photo of the treehouse, weathered and strange-looking from below. But this treehouse wasn't just a desperate purchase. It was the life's work of Elias Grant, one of the most brilliant architects of the 20th century. A man who walked away from fame and fortune because he believed architecture should serve people, not profit. She showed Elias's blueprints, explaining each innovation, each cost-saving technique, each sustainability feature. She showed the construction notes, proving these weren't fantasy concepts, but buildable practical designs. She showed her own calculations, updating material costs to current prices, demonstrating that a family of four could live in one of Elias's homes for under $20,000 in construction costs. These designs prove something the development industry doesn't want to admit. Aisha said that affordable, beautiful, sustainable housing is possible. It always has been. We just chose not to build it because there's more profit in building cheap identical boxes that fall apart in 20 years and force people into endless cycles of rent and debt. She told them about Cascade Holdings, about the threats and legal intimidation, about companies that would rather destroy innovation than see it change their business model. She showed photos of homeless encampments in Portland, of families living in cars, of the affordable housing crisis crushing communities across America. Elias Grant hid his work because he knew it was dangerous, Aisha said. Dangerous to powerful interests, dangerous to the status quo, but he also believed it would survive until someone needed it badly enough to fight for it. I'm that person. I'm fighting because my daughter deserves a home, because millions of families deserve homes, because housing is a human right, not a luxury commodity, she concluded with a challenge. Elias's designs are being digitized and will be released as open-source architecture. Anyone can use them. Anyone can adapt them. Anyone can build them. I'm calling on architects, developers, non-profits, and communities to take these designs and make them real. Build them, improve them. Prove that we can do better than the system we have. Prove that Elias Grant's vision wasn't naive. It was right. The auditorium erupted in applause. People stood and the sound washed over Aisha like a wave. She stood on that stage, tears streaming down her face, and felt something break inside her. Not break like shattering, but break like a shell cracking open. She wasn't the disgraced architect anymore. She wasn't the crazy treehouse lady. She was someone who'd survived hell and come out carrying treasure. She was someone with something to say. The next 3 hours were a blur of conversations, business cards, journalists wanting interviews, architects wanting to collaborate. A non-profit called Homebuilders Alliance offered to fund the construction of 5 pilot projects using Elias's designs. A developer from Seattle wanted to license the treehouse concept for an eco-village. A documentary filmmaker wanted to tell the whole story. But the moment that mattered most came from a young black woman, probably mid-20s, who approached Aisha during a break. I'm in graduate school studying architecture, she said. And I've been told 100 times that affordable housing can't be beautiful, that sustainability is too expensive, that poor people should be grateful for whatever shelter they get. Your presentation proved all of that is a lie. You changed my life today. Thank you. Aisha hugged her. This stranger who represented every architect who'd ever been told to compromise their vision and whispered, "Go build something beautiful that everyone can afford." That's how you thank me. The legal battle with Cascade Holdings continued for 3 more months. Lena Hayes fought viciously and the media attention made it difficult for Cascade to operate in the shadows. When it became clear they couldn't win through legal means, they tried one last tactic. They offered Aisha $2 million for the property and all rights to Elias's designs. Aisha met with Richard Vance one final time. In Etta's living room, with Lena present, Richard laid out the offer, painting it as generous, logical, the smart choice. You could be set for life, he said. Your daughter could go to any college. You could buy a real home, restart your career. All you have to do is sell. No, Aisha said simply. Miss Thompson, be reasonable. I said, no. Aisha stood, her voice calm but unshakable. Elias Grant died protecting this work from people like you. I'm not going to be the one who hands it over. This land, this treehouse, these designs, they're not for sale. Not for $2 million, not for $20 million. They're meant to be shared, not owned. Richard's mask slipped, revealing anger underneath. You're making a mistake. We could have been partners. You could never be my partner. Aisha said, partners respect each other. You just want to control and exploit. Get out. Cascade Holdings finally withdrew their lawsuit in June, probably calculating that the negative publicity was costing them more than the land was worth. Lena Hayes called with the news and Aisha hung up the phone before screaming with joy so loudly that Lila came running thinking something was wrong. We won, baby. We won. They danced around the treehouse, laughing and crying, and Aisha felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of fear and uncertainty lifted, replaced by something fiercer. Certainty. She knew what she was supposed to do now. She knew who she was. In July, Aisha established the Elias Grant Foundation for Sustainable Housing. Nia Brooks joined as executive director. Etta donated her property to the foundation, creating a campus where architects could study Elias's techniques and test new sustainable designs. Tom Whitaker became the chief builder, hiring local crews and training them in the innovative construction methods. The first project broke ground in August, a cluster of 6 small homes on the edge of Riverside Bend. Built using Elias's designs for families transitioning out of homelessness, Aisha worked alongside the construction crews, her hands back in tool belts, her mind solving problems, her heart full of purpose. The houses went up fast. Beautiful little structures nestled among the trees, each one costing $18,000 in materials and completed in 6 weeks. When the families moved in, Aisha stood with Lila and watched. A single black mother with 3 kids, tears streaming down her face as she walked into a home that was hers. An elderly veteran who'd been living in his car, shaking hands with Jamal and saying it was the nicest place he'd ever lived. A young couple with a baby standing on their tiny porch and looking out at the mountains like they were seeing the world for the first time. We did this, Lila whispered. We did, Aisha agreed. And we're just getting started. The treehouse became exactly what Elias had probably hoped it would be, a living laboratory and educational center. Architecture students came from across the country to study its design. The foundation offered workshops on sustainable building techniques. Tour groups visited on weekends, walking across the swaying bridge, seeing the secret room, learning about the man who'd built it and the black woman who'd found it. Aisha finally had business cards printed. Aisha Thompson, founder and chief architect. Elias Grant Foundation. Sometimes she'd look at them and marvel at how far she'd come from those dark days after the divorce when she couldn't even get an interview. The town of Riverside Bend transformed alongside her. The affordable housing project brought jobs, attracted attention, and gave the community something to be proud of. The general store started selling postcards of the treehouse. The diner created a Grant burger and donated proceeds to the foundation. The school added sustainable architecture to its curriculum with Aisha coming in quarterly to teach. One afternoon in October, exactly 1 year after she'd moved into the treehouse, Aisha stood on the platform watching the leaves turn gold. Lila was below with a group of her friends, leading them on a tour of the property with all the confidence of someone who'd grown up in magic. Etta climbed up, moving slowly but steadily. She joined Aisha at the railing. Elias would be so proud, she said. You did what he couldn't. You brought his work into the world. We all did. Aisha said, you, me, Nia, Jamal, Lena, all of us, but you were the catalyst. Etta insisted. You were brave enough to buy a crazy treehouse, stubborn enough to stay when everyone judged you, smart enough to find the secrets, and courageous enough to fight for them. That's not us. That's you. Aisha thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, broken and desperate, signing papers for a property everyone called cursed. She thought about the single black mother terrified of losing her daughter. The disgraced architect who thought her career was over. The person who'd felt small and worthless and defeated. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who'd learned that falling apart sometimes meant you got to rebuild yourself into something stronger. Someone who discovered that the things people mock are often just innovations they're not ready to understand. Someone who'd proven that one person with conviction could change the conversation. By November, the foundation had completed 12 housing units across 3 different projects. Each one was documented meticulously with costs tracked, energy efficiency measured, and resident satisfaction surveyed. The data proved what Aisha had been arguing all along. Elias's designs weren't just beautiful theory. They were practical reality. The construction costs averaged $19,300 per unit. Energy costs were 70% lower than conventional housing, and every single resident reported feeling safer, happier, and more connected to their community than in previous housing. Universities started reaching out. Wanting to partner on research projects, the State Housing Authority invited Aisha to consult on affordable housing policy. A PBS documentary crew spent 2 weeks filming at the Treehouse, interviewing Aisha, Etta, and the families who'd moved into Elias's designs. The documentary, titled *The Architect in the Trees*, would air the following spring and win 3 awards. But success brought new challenges. The foundation was growing faster than Aisha had anticipated, and she found herself spending more time in meetings than on construction sites. She hired staff, people who believed in the mission, and brought skills she didn't have: grant writers, project managers, communication specialists. The operation that had started with just her and a hidden room full of blueprints now employed 17 people. One evening in early December, Aisha sat at Etta's kitchen table, reviewing budgets, and feeling overwhelmed. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, running a foundation, managing staff, dealing with donors. "I'm an architect, not a CEO." Etta poured them both tea and sat down with a knowing smile. "You know what Elias used to say? That the best leaders are the ones who never wanted to lead because they do it out of necessity, not ego. You didn't set out to build an empire, Aisha. You set out to honor someone's work and help people who needed homes. That authentic purpose is what makes people follow you. I'm terrified I'll mess it up. Aisha said that I'll make the wrong decision and destroy everything we've built. Then you'll learn from it and do better." Etta said simply, "Perfection isn't the goal. Progress is. You're already changing lives. That's what matters." The next day, Aisha made a decision. She promoted Nia to CEO of the foundation, acknowledging that her friend had the business skills and experience that Aisha lacked. Aisha would remain as chief architect and public face, doing what she did best: designing, building, telling stories. It was the right move, and everyone knew it. The foundation ran smoother almost immediately. Christmas came and the treehouse was transformed. Lila insisted on decorating, stringing lights along the railings, and hanging ornaments from the branches. They invited Etta, Jamal, and his family. Lena, the lawyer, and some of the families from the housing projects. 19 people crammed into the treehouse, eating potluck dinner, and singing carols slightly off-key. Aisha looked around at these people who'd become her family. This community that had formed around Elias's vision, and felt grateful in a way that made her chest ache. A year ago, she'd been alone, frightened, mocked by this town. Now, she was surrounded by people who believed in her, who'd fought alongside her, who'd proven that community could be chosen as much as inherited. The day after Christmas, Aisha received an unexpected letter. It was from Marcus, her ex-husband. She almost threw it away without reading, but curiosity won out. "Aisha," it began. "I saw the documentary preview and the articles about your foundation. I wanted to say that I'm impressed by what you've built, and I'm sorry for how I treated you during the divorce. I was cruel because I was guilty, and I took everything I could because I was afraid you'd be better off without me. Turns out I was right. You're doing work that actually matters. While I'm still just shuffling money around for rich people, I know this apology is years too late, but I needed to say it. You deserved better than me. Lila is lucky to have you as her mother." Marcus. Aisha read it twice, then tucked it away in a drawer. The apology didn't change anything, didn't undo the damage or make up for the pain, but it was closure of a kind. Proof that she'd not only survived his cruelty, but had turned it into fuel for something meaningful. She didn't need his validation anymore. She'd found her own. As the year turned from 2023 to 2024, Aisha stood on the Treehouse platform at midnight with Lila bundled in a blanket beside her. They watched fireworks from the distant town, little bursts of color against the black sky. "Make a wish, Mama," Lila said. Aisha closed her eyes. A year ago, she would have wished for stability, for money, for respect. Now she wished for something different, for the strength to keep building, for the wisdom to lead well, for more families to find homes in structures designed with love and care, for Elias's legacy to spread further than even he had dreamed. "What did you wish for?" Lila asked. "That we keep changing the world, one house at a time," Aisha said. Lila grinned. "That's a good wish." "I was so angry when I lost everything," Aisha said softly. "I thought Marcus and his lawyers had destroyed my life. But they just burned away the parts that were never really mine. The job that never valued me. The marriage built on lies. The life that looked perfect but felt hollow. Losing all that made space for this, for purpose, for something that actually matters." Etta squeezed her hand. "That's not losing, dear. That's becoming." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in impossible colors, Aisha felt complete in a way she'd never experienced before. Not perfect. There were still struggles, still bills to pay, still battles to fight, but whole. She'd come to this treehouse carrying nothing but desperation and a 7-year-old girl. She'd found a dead man's dreams and turned them into living change. She'd been mocked and threatened and doubted, and she'd won anyway. Because some victories aren't about getting back what you lost. They're about discovering what you never knew you needed. Elias Grant had needed someone to find his work. The world had needed proof that affordable housing was possible. Aisha had needed to learn she was stronger than anyone, including herself, had ever believed. And Lila, growing up in a treehouse above a lake, learning that home wasn't about square footage or zip codes, but about love and creativity and refusing to be small when the world demanded it, Lila would carry all of this forward into whatever future she built for herself. The treehouse swayed gently in the evening breeze. Somewhere below, children laughed. Somewhere nearby, families were eating dinner in homes that proved housing justice was possible. Somewhere in the world, architects were downloading Elias's open-source designs and planning to build something better. Anyone can change the world if they're willing to climb into the tree everyone else calls crazy and stay there long enough to find the treasure hidden in its branches. Aisha Thompson had climbed. She'd stayed and she'd found something worth more than money, worth more than reputation, worth more than the life she'd lost. She'd found purpose. She'd found herself. She'd found proof that sometimes the people society discards are the ones who change everything. Because broken things can be rebuilt stronger, fallen people can rise higher, and a single black mother in a treehouse, armed with nothing but determination and a dead architect's dreams, can remind the world that housing is a human right, that innovation belongs to everyone, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to give up when everyone expects you to fall. The black woman who moved into a treehouse while the town laughed became the black woman who proved them all wrong, not with anger or revenge, but with vision and resilience and the unshakable belief that everyone, regardless of income or circumstances, deserved a place to call home. She'd been mocked for moving into the trees, but she'd found Elias Grant's secret room, and in doing so, she'd found the blueprint for her own redemption and the foundation for a revolution in affordable housing that would ripple outward for generations to come. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories that will move you. Click now to keep discovering with us and hit subscribe if you believe forgotten dreams still deserve to soar.